and read the last chapter or two before you read the rest of the book. One of my friends from school will read the last chapter of the book, or the first chapter of the book, then the last, and then she'll go back and reread the entire book. And I asked her why she did this, and she was like, well, I have to know what happens before I get emotionally attached to this book. And I thought that was so funny. And one of the things from Revelation is the last book of the Bible. And the purpose of the book of Revelation is to show us how the story ends. What does the final chapter have in store for us? The book of Revelation is broken down into two parts, the sevens and worship. The sevens are demonstrations of the human condition and include the 7 lampstands, the 7 churches, the 7 trumpets, and others. These sevens are interlaced with moments of worship. Moments of worship that show the goodness of God and show us that God is always present. The end of the story is that God prevails by redeeming the human condition. The Apostle John gives us an image of this new Jerusalem coming from heaven to earth. Not going up to heaven, but this image of heaven descending to earth in the form of a new Jerusalem. One of the things that John mentions in his description of the New Jerusalem is that he was led in the way of the Spirit to a huge, majestic mountain, and when he arrived, he saw that there was no temple in the city to worship, because the Lord and the Lamb are its temple. What is the need for a temple if you are in the presence of He who you are worshiping? There is no need, because He is there. In this city, there is no light from the sun or moon or artificial lights, because the glory of God illuminates New Jerusalem and the Lamb is its lamp. Can you imagine a light so brilliant that there is no need for the sun or the moon? That the light from the sun and the moon could not slightly compare to the excellence of the light of the glory of God. That's God's presence. God's presence is the radiance of light, and that light of God is sufficient for us to live. The next verse says that the nations will walk by God's light, and the kings of the earth will bring splendor into it. This provoked thought in me as I wrote this sermon. All of the kings of the earth, men, leaders, men who represent economic and political power, that represent perhaps different ethnicities, men that are sometimes good, sometimes bad, none of which are perfect, but all of which are there and are dressed the best they can be. Men in their finest robes and crowns, jewels, all in a parade. To me, it reminded me of the parade of countries during the Olympics. But the kings, all dressed as finely as they could, in their regal robes with like the fur and Kings and their countries parading, but there is only an audience of one. And he is the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings. All people are welcome in heaven. All people of all the nations of the earth will be allowed in. The gates will never close, and there will be no night. John speaks of the waters of life and the tree of life. The river of water of life flows right through Main Street in Jerusalem, and I picture the tree of life over it in the center of town, like the tree of life in the center of Animal Kingdom, Disney World. This enormous tree that makes its second and final appearance in the Bible after its introduction in Genesis. This tree may very well be an example of the beginning and the end. The difference that is noticed is that the fruit from this tree is used to nourish the nations, and the leaves of this tree are consumed to heal the nations, and there will no longer be any curse. Is this the curse that Adam and Eve bestowed on us? Does this story end as it began, with a tree that was forbidden? In a perfect world that Adam and Eve lived in, there was no need for the fruit to provide for them. But after the corruption of years and years of war, hatred, and evil, the fruit of this tree is what is needed for the peace of the nations of the earth and all of their grandeur. The curse is lifted, and the tree of life heals, and the supremacy of God and of the Lamb remain forever. Let me ask you, how does this change the way that we live today? How does this knowledge affect you? How does this make you feel? Through acts of kindness and goodness and loving our neighbor, we demonstrate our faith in the God who brings into reality the New Jerusalem. We as Church for the Highlands gather to worship and go out to love our neighborhood because we believe that God will bring about the New Jerusalem to these people. In the book of Revelation, we are told the end of the story. The end of the story can be interpreted in many ways, but the conclusion will always be the same. God wins. Thank you.